Good evening and welcome to this evening's event. To begin our program, please welcome the Director of External Affairs of the Boston Debate League, Jackney Joseph.
Good evening and welcome. Thank you for joining the Boston Debate League and Suffolk University for tonight's Race, Equity, and Policy series on taking action and calling for change. The BDL's mission is to integrate argumentation and competitive debate into Boston, Chelsea, and Somerville public schools to develop critical thinkers ready for college, career, and engagement in the world around them. We serve over 700 students a year in our after-school debate program and provide professional development to teachers through debate-inspired classrooms. We seek to transform the classroom into a place where students are not just critical thinkers, but become agents of their own learning and are empowered to use their voice and make change. The Race Equity Policy Series is a year-long series of dialogues and learning opportunities for students and the broader community. And so far this year, we've explored the multiple facets of criminal justice reform, looking at policing, sentencing, prisons, criminal justice, and immigration communities, and now community activism. And we've connected the broader Suffolk, BDL, and Boston communities to policy leaders, change makers, people impacted by and involved in the criminal justice system, and those who advocate for a diversity of policies and practices. And we've been thrilled to partner with Suffolk University in this work. Suffolk has been a constant supporter of the BDL, from offering space for debate tournaments to hosting BDL students in a dual enrollment course, and now collaborating with us on this series over this last year. Today's event is the final community forum in the series, and so we're just excited to have you all joining us tonight. Before we get started, just a few things. The chat is open, so please let us know where you're joining us from this evening. Put your questions in the chat. I know we have some students, for our BDL students and Suffolk Law students who may be joining us tonight. Please let us know who you are. And as always, please mute your mics. And lastly, we do have Spanish translation for tonight's event. So if you look down at the bottom of your screen, you will see the translation button, and we do have Spanish translation tonight. Tonight we will be joined by our Massachusetts State Representative for the 12th Suffolk District, Rep. Brandy Fluker Oakley, in a fireside chat, and that will be followed by a panel discussion with Phebean Ogunsanwo, who is a BDL debater and activist, and Rodney Adams, who is part of the political advocacy team with Black Boston. So this past year, we really dove into these topics around policing and community, and communities, prosecutorial discretion, the criminalization of the immigrant community, and the challenges for our returning citizens. And today we have a chance to discuss what we can all do to take action and call for change in our communities. There are so many ways that people can take action, both big and small ways, and traditional and non-traditional ways. And we've seen that even within the bounds of tradition, people can push for change. But what does that look like in reality? And how can we apply this to advancing criminal justice reform? Today, we'll have a chance to hear from Representative Brandy Fluker Oakley in the first part of our conversation. And in the second part of our conversation, we will speak with two young activists to talk more about what taking action and calling for change looks like. So I'm excited and honored to welcome Rep. Brandy Fluker Oakley.
Thank you so much for having me, Jackney. Thank you to the Boston Debate League and Suffolk University for hosting all of these forums. It's been a pleasure to participate and to watch them as well.
Well, thank you so much. And we're so excited to have you here tonight. And so, you're a state rep. Now you have some significant levers that you can pull to take action, but you took action in the community before running for office. I think I heard something about a third grade protest. So please tell us a little bit more about, what you did before becoming a state rep.
Yeah, third grade protest, there was an after school policy that just didn't seem to quite make sense. And so at first I petitioned the school leadership, who politely told me no. And then I started to, meaning I just asked them, hey, can we change this policy? This is the reason why. They were like, no, it's not going to happen. So then I actually got a petition and had my fellow students in the after school program sign it with their parents as well when they would come pick it up, come pick their children up and tell them about the issues. So then I presented the petition to school leadership, and then they finally changed the policy. And that was when I was 8. I didn't know that there was actually a career where you could do that. And I didn't actually find that out until much, much later in life, when I was able to do some organizing work and do some systems level change through grassroots and community organizing. And I think for me, when I think about even being a state rep, it's not just about making laws and policy, but I truly believe that elected officials should be accountable to the people that they represent, which is why it's so important to me that I'm seeking the feedback and input of my constituents every step of the way, and that they're really the ones driving the agenda to make sure that we have an equitable place where all of us can thrive.
And you mentioned sort of running for office, and this running for office, serving as an elected official, it seemed like very traditional paths to addressing community issues. But in fact, Black and Brown communities in particular, for Black women, this is historically hasn't been the typical path, given the hurdles and obstacles, even what you mentioned, in the third grade, sort of experiencing. And additionally, Black and Brown communities have had a measure of ambivalence towards elected officials. And so, why is this the path that you chose?
Yeah, the path sort of chose me. I know I referenced not realizing there was a career where you could organize and see people's input and make systems level change. And I think part of that is because growing up Black in America, messaging that I've received from the community is if you want to be successful, you have to be a lawyer, doctor, or engineer. And those are like the 3 career paths, or else it's not worth it. And so I think what happened to me and so many other young people is we had gifts that had parallel career paths, but we weren't exposed to those career paths. Thankfully, throughout after school programming, mentorship, other people recognizing my gifts in me and saying, hey, did you ever think about running for office? And I would say, oh no, I've seen House of Cards. I will not be running for office. And I think having other people see your gifts, your talents, and where they might be used for the better good definitely helped put me on the path for elected office. But I also think it's just all about serving wherever you are, wherever you're placed in a position, there's work to be done. And certainly I didn't chart my career trajectory with this end goal of running for office. I just kind of paid attention to what my interests were, where my skill set lied. I went to college majoring in social work and public policy with a focus on urban education. And for me, if I was going to make ed policy, I wanted classroom experience. So I taught third grade and was an advocate for my students there, and then realized that there were so many systemic things all written into our laws that I wanted to change. So I went to law school to learn more. Came out of law school as a public defender, saw the systemic inequities and the interconnectedness between our public education system and our criminal justice system. So I left law to become an advocate, which is when I was like, oh, organizing is a whole profession. Why didn't I know this before? And fell in love with it and led teams to make systems level change. So I think it's also being true to yourself as well, and really going where you're gifted in order to find your career path. And this is where mine has led me thus far.
Thank you for giving us that background information. And I wonder, now that you're sort of in a little bit more of a traditional role, do you still consider yourself an activist now? And how is that reflected in the approach to your work?
I don't know if this is a saying, but it should be once an activist, always an activist. I don't think that's something that goes away or that any one of us loses when we have that bug and have been bit by it. I think the way my activism shows up is differently. I know for me growing up, I used to pick every battle and fight everything that I thought needed to be changed, which really just led to sheer exhaustion. And so certainly in this position as an elected official, I'm a little more mindful of the battles that I choose. And to my earlier point of seeing gifts in other people, if there's someone who I think would be a better messenger for something, or if there's someone who I think has the same passion and can really move something forward, I'll reach out to them and say, hey, did you hear about this thing? Have you considered doing XYZ about it? So kind of pushing others to use their activist gift and put them in seats where they can make the change that needs to happen.
Thank you. You mentioned earlier sort of the community driving the agenda, and I know you've started this thing called the community cabinet, and so I'd love to talk about that idea because it's not agenda centered, but really community centered, and it's the community driving that agenda. And how does this apply to your work on criminal justice reform?
Yeah, so the community cabinet was an idea I had when I was running for office, and I was thinking on my own experience. And this is not to speak ill of any elected official, but what often happens is someone will run for office, you'll see them around election time, you'll know their platform and what they're about, and then they're doing the work and not necessarily reaching back to the community to inform them besides a email newsletter, which we all know we get all the newsletters, right, from all the organizations. So it gets lost in the shuffle. And I was really thinking about, I am a representative of the people, not of my own, ego or what I think should happen. Certainly I have ideas, but it's not just about me. It's truly about community. And I thought, what if there was a community cabinet? When you're running for office, you have like your kitchen cabinet to advise you, to help you make decisions, to give you feedback, to thought partner with. What if there was a community cabinet made up of constituents from the district who did the exact same thing as the kitchen cabinet, but as it relates to policy and getting things done at the State House? And so thanks to some wonderful interns, was able to turn the vision of the community cabinet into a real idea. We actually had our first meeting just this past Tuesday, which was so great to bring together everyone from across the district. I represent parts of Mattapan, Dorchester, Hyde Park, and Milton. Everyone had varied interests. Folks were really excited to meet new people in the community. And we were able to talk about some of the issues and challenges. People asked questions about policy. How does it happen? How does this work at the State House? Which, knowing the ins and outs of local government, knowledge is power. It only helps people to be better advocates and to make the change they want to see. And I'm really excited to continue to work with the community cabinet. I know I have some votes coming up that I want their perspective and insight on. And it's really about having true, authentic, two-way communication. Okay, y'all want me to make this happen? Here's my challenges. How should we approach it? Let's all partner together. Okay, who can do this? Who can do that? And really just being a team so we can all thrive together in the 12th Suffolk.
When people think about, criminal justice reform, they usually think prisons. But where does criminal justice reform begin for you?
Yeah. This is such a tough question because I feel the more I live and the more I see things and learn things, this answer shifts for me. Certainly early in my career, teenage years, I would have thought the same thing. Okay, it starts when someone actually becomes incarcerated. And then when I became a public school teacher and I saw how some disciplinary policies and practices actually allowed our very young students, I taught third grade, so even elementary school students have encounters and interactions with our criminal justice system. I thought, okay, maybe it's the school policies and practices. And then when I got to law school and I was studying constitutional law and I read the 13th Amendment, which, most people herald as outlawing slavery, but there's a but clause, except in the case of punishment for a crime. And then when we look at our criminal justice system, when we see overwhelmingly the people who are serving time identify as Black, Latinx, so brown skin, like the same people who were enslaved, it makes me wonder, maybe this started from the inception of the founding of our nation, to be perfectly honest. And so it goes beyond just when someone encounters law enforcement, is adjudicated for a crime. It goes to the policies in our schools and classrooms. It goes to the interactions that folks have in the community with law enforcement. It goes to reentry once someone has served their time. It goes to juveniles who may be diverted, which means that they get kind of a second chance to not serve time and do some other processes to get the help and support that they need. And I think when I, growing up, being a Black person in America, it feels like it starts every time I step outside of my door. because I don't know what's going to happen. I'm a runner. Sometimes I go running early in the morning. And as a woman as well, I sometimes have like fear. Like, what if someone jumps out from the bushes and gets me and I have to call 911 and there's confusion about what's happening and what's going on, you know? And so it varies where I think it starts for me. But I know that it starts and probably sooner than it should. And I know when it starts, it certainly isn't applied fairly, particularly for Black and Brown communities. And that's something that I'm hoping to change as a state representative.
Thank you. And I know you've got a pretty broad agenda, but you do have some specific work that you're doing around criminal justice reform. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Absolutely. So there are a few bills that I'm really proud to be the lead sponsor for up at the State House. One is in partnership that was drafted with Suffolk County District Attorney Rachel Rollins, and that's an act to enable prosecutors to carry out their ethical obligations and address unjust convictions, or as we call it, wrongful conviction innocence legislation, which basically is saying, look, one wrongful conviction is one too many. And if there are prosecutors across the Commonwealth who truly believe that their office made a mistake by convicting an innocent person, they should be allowed to ask a judge to vacate that person's sentence. That is in the benefit of justice to do that. So it would allow for DAs to exercise that type of discretion if there's evidence that the defendant is innocent or that the law was improperly applied to a defendant. And while this legislation wasn't crafted because of, you know, everything that's happening with Sean Ellis, that's probably the most notable case in our current present day of when there is evidence that maybe we didn't get the right person for this and we should do something about that particular situation. The other bill is with Senator Sonia Chang Diaz, and we refer to it as the START Act with 2 T's. But basically, it's about supporting our community members who are re-entering after being incarcerated. And in particular, it talks about making sure they have identification. We all know how many things we use identification for. You need identification to access basic services. And if we really want our community members to reduce recidivism, we have to set them up for success. But so many people, once they're being released, don't necessarily have a permanent address. They're not exactly sure where they're staying, or it's with a family member. It's just the laws are too strict to allow them to put down an address. And so this law actually broadens where someone can list as an address so that way they can get access to vital services. Because even trying to get into a sober treatment home requires identification. And so many of our community members re-entering just don't have those. I also co-sponsored in the Senate side with Senator Cream a youth diversion bill, which basically prevents our young people from having a juvenile record. And judges in the Commonwealth are able to divert young people for certain charges, but the list is pretty limited. And both our youth and public safety are served better when we have alternatives to the juvenile justice system. And so this expands those particular alternatives and allows a judge who's qualified to hear the facts to determine if this youth or young person should be diverted or not. And then the only other bill I'll mention, as you can see, okay, I lied, 2 bills I'll mention. This is something that really impacts our community here in the South Suffolk that I heard like day in and day out on the campaign trail. With Senator Cream is an act relative to judicial supervision. Oh no, I talked about that one. I'm sorry. Senator Boncory, which basically removes collateral consequences and protects the presumption of innocence. So it automatically seals non-convictions, which helps when people are running background checks because employers match that. And it stops penalizing people who might not submit their paperwork on time for a query, given how arduous those legal forms are and how you might lose track of time. Like, there's just so many reasons. If we know that they've reached the time frame for their query to be sealed, we should just do this automatically, as opposed to putting the burden on the person who has been released or served their time. And then last but not least is a student resource officer bill. So in the Commonwealth, you know, we have school officers and we also have mental health support staff. And this basically says if a school employs one student resource officer, they should also have a ratio of 7 mental health professionals. We know that trauma manifests itself in behavior for students. And when you have law enforcement respond, you're only treating the symptom as opposed to getting to the root cause, which is what trained clinicians are able to do. And so this just writes that ratio. So in our schools, our students are being set up for success to acquire the quality instruction that's being delivered to them day in and day out. And similarly, I filed a bill that when there's a community member in crisis and 911 is called, instead of sending an officer, that we send a trained clinician who knows how to de-escalate a situation, which also helps to address what's happening with that particular community member in crisis, and also limits unwanted and potentially harmful and negative interaction with law enforcement and community members. So those are some of the bills that I have filed up at the State House, and have been working to get co-sponsors and testimony and all the fun advocacy stuff that goes into making a bill become a law.
Well, thank you for sharing all that. And I definitely want to ask, as we're talking about taking action, like, how can people support your work on criminal justice reform, and how can they partner with you?
Yeah, absolutely. So there are a couple of ways. One is everyone can reach out to their local state senator and state representative and ask them to co-sponsor the bills that I mentioned. My team member Chris is on the call, so I'm sure he can drop that into the chat if folks want to know some of the bills and what they are. I think the other thing is when you see something happening, don't be afraid to call your elected official, whether it's your city councilor, the local sheriff's office. At the end of the day, it's our tax dollars that are paying for these people's salary, i.e. your tax dollars are paying for my salary. Therefore, I am held, in my mind, accountable to you. I think the other thing, too, is funding priorities occur in the budget around the springtime. So on the House side, for example, we've already done our budget. The city of Boston is in the process of doing their budget for the year. And a lot of municipalities depend on funding from the state in order to do the work that they're doing. And I think we're so blessed here in Suffolk County to have District Attorney Rachel Rollins, who's been such a progressive, forward-thinking, truly equitable district attorney, and such a model, I think, for the entire nation on what it looks like to still uphold the law and be fair and equitable and treat disparate impact. And I know that within her office, she's hoping to build out an integrity review application process, but needs the necessary dollars and funding in order to make that happen. And so making sure that when it's budget time and budget season, that you're reaching out to your elected officials, so let them know what your priorities are and where you want them to spend and invest our resources to really reflect the things that we want to be true in our community.
I appreciate you giving us that more information about how we can support this work. And we'll be talking to two younger activists, one who is a former BDL debater and is going off to college, and another who is actually in his senior year and will be graduating this year. So I wonder what you would say to them and to other young activists.
Yeah, I would say just stay true to yourself. No matter what that is. So I have a friend who, she's an activist, but you won't catch her at a march because of anxiety, but she will write a letter to any and every elected official and make it personalized on why they need to do X, Y, Z. There are some activists amongst us who are going to be the ones who are organizing the protests and the rallies, having the strategic conversations with other stakeholders in order to make policy happen. And there are those who can be there to provide the snacks and to support the cause and to help people register to vote. I think what I'm really trying to say is get in where you fit in, and don't be afraid to use your voice. And if you don't feel comfortable using your voice, maybe you're an introvert, there are still other ways you can use your skill set in order to impact your community and make change. And I would also say, for those who have found their voice and appreciate using it, don't let society tell you to change. There's a part of socialization. Everyone likes the activist until it's time to be an activist, right? It's like, oh, we love the notion of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and Malcolm X, whose birthday is today, by the way. But when you look at how they were treated throughout the history books, it wasn't all warm and fuzzy. They're just now getting their flowers now that they're gone. And so I think it's okay to not let society chip away at the fire and the passion that you were born with, and to find ways to leverage it to make the change that you want to see in the world. And have no fear. Just have no fear.
I really appreciate that your comment about that activism looks different for, it's not just the people protesting, but, even those who will call or who will prepare food for the meeting. There's so many different ways to engage, and we need everyone doing that. So I really do appreciate that. And I appreciate your time, Rep. Fluker Oakley, and thank you for being a supporter of the Boston Debate League. Thank you for joining us here tonight. It really was wonderful having you talk about your journey and the work that you're doing. And I know your staff members on as well. And feel free to drop links to those bills in the chat. I see that starting right now. And reach out to her office if you have questions or you want to get engaged, particularly in the community cabinet.
That's awesome. Thank you so much, Jackney, for again this event and this time. And I'm sending lots of love to the young activists you'll speak to next, and hopefully all the activists, young or old, who are watching this. So thank you so much for having me, and I hope you have a good night.
Thank you. You too. Great. In this second part of our conversation tonight, we will be joined by Phebean, Ogunsanwo, and Rodney Adams. Hello. Thank you for joining us tonight as we wrap up our Race, Equity, and Policy series. I think it is just so appropriate to have the both of you here because I think over the last year and change, we have definitely seen our young people really just taking a stand and leading us, toward equity and towards justice. And so I thank you both for joining us here tonight. And I want to open up by just asking you to talk about what led you to activism and why this work is important to you.
Yes, thank you for having me as well. I'm so excited for this event. I think what really led me to activism is I've always had, the ability to identify problems and kind of ask and wonder why these problems exist, and especially in our society, wondering why Black women, their death rates at birth are so much higher than women in general, or why the median household income in Boston for Black families is $8 compared to white families when it's in the hundreds of thousands of dollars, and also why Black and brown individuals are incarcerated at higher rates than white individuals. And then when you start to look at these questions and ask why, you start to look at the histories and the trauma that's been inflicted on communities and the experiences that people have to deal with every day, right? And the reason why I kind of really resonated with activism personally is because it allows for us to highlight and to uplift a lot of these voices and experiences that historically have not been able to be in the room and have not been able to gauge and guide the decision makers or policymakers who have the control to fund resources and to shuttle different attitudes in certain directions. And activism also has the innate ability to connect people and to bring people together. And a part of Black Boston 2020, their inception was started with the protest, and you can really see the power of activism with that protest, with young people coming together who all share these common ideas about experiences that we go through every day. So I think activism is really good to kind of address the problems that we see in our everyday lives, but also just to connect with other people and to talk and to figure out solutions that we can come together and put forward on the table.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. I am so sorry my camera is blurry. I have no idea why, but I hope you could at least semi-see me.
Yeah, no worries.
Um,
Yeah, we can.
but you know, I have a passion for justice. I hate seeing injustices happen. And you know, when I moved to America, I started to see all of these injustices happening to marginalized communities. And I was just so upset. And, you know, I decided to channel my anger into activism and fighting for justice because I realized that if I want to see change, I have to be the change. I cannot wait for somebody else to do it. I have to step up and do it. So that's how I got into activism. And, you know, so what made me get into activism was being upset at the society that we live in right now and having the passion for wanting to change it.
Thank you. Oh, Phebean, I wonder if you could speak a bit about why you have focused your advocacy specifically on Black women.
Yes, of course. So, you know, like Malcolm X once said, the most disrespected, neglected, unprotected group of people in America are the Black women. And honestly, I would go further to say in most part of the world are Black women, unfortunately. And, you know, Black women, we have to face this intersectionality of racism and sexism everywhere we go. You know, we can't pick and choose any of our identities. And I have noticed that Black women are often left out of the conversations in terms of activism. You know, Black women, we carry America on our backs. You know, we've started and created most of the movements that have happened, yet we get left out of it because of sexism. And it was really upsetting to me. And I decided that if nobody's going to focus on Black women, I am going to focus on Black women. I am going to uplift my sisters and, you know, our voices so that somebody can listen to us because I'm tired of it being forgotten.
And Rodney, you are a senior in college and you are graduating in a few short weeks. So you are busy. But you've kept up your involvement with Black Boston, and you've really continued to keep it a priority. Uh, can you talk about why?
Yes. You know, before I went to college, my father had told me that, you know, it's 4 years, but it's going to go by in the blink of an eye. And I realized that being at college is, you know, while I'm here doing my studies, the world is still going on around me. You know, society's still moving. People are still getting up every day, going to their jobs and having to deal with these experiences that we're trying to highlight and push. And also for me, I recognize that you know, my interest on the political advocacy team really stemmed from the fact that we're in, you know, a mayoral election year for Boston, and it's really critical that we not only understand the political processes of our local governments, but also to educate the younger individuals who are up and coming, who are going to be able to vote in this election cycle, or in terms of if we're thinking about on a national scale, then the next presidential election cycle as well. So I think that my priority has really kind of it has shifted towards Black Boston in these last few weeks of my semester, but it also stems from the fact of me acknowledging that these problems don't go away and these issues are continuous. So the attention that needs to be focused on them, no matter where I am in life, it needs to be uniform.
Thank you. This year, you know, a global pandemic is really um, short-circuited everything, right? And so we can't be in person, and so we've been doing things virtually. And so I wonder, you know, what has your activism looked like during this time, and how do you engage the community around you?
Oh, do I go first?
Either.
Right. So, once we went virtual, I also went virtual in terms of my activism. I mean, not completely virtual because I have also gone to BLM protests at school that I helped create, obviously with mask and social distancing and things like that. I feel like, I kept up with what was happening in the world. I went virtual once it did because, you know, injustice didn't stop or be on pause with the coronavirus, with the pandemic. It continued, and I didn't like that. And so I decided that I was going to plan, my events because, I couldn't be physically at school educating people, having my signs, my pins, my Black Lives Matter shirts. Like I didn't have any of that at school. So I didn't think I had a way of really educating people except from social media, which I really used a lot. So I decided that I was going to create, an event. So I planned my first event on July 4th because I didn't feel comfortable celebrating white male independence because we weren't all free. Like, yeah. So I invited, all the marginalized communities from one of my organizations to come talk about the struggles that they face in America. It was very powerful. And then the next virtual event I planned it in partnership with BDL and Black Boston's political advocacy team. They are incredible women. It was called Let's Talk About Black Women, where I highlighted the struggles that Black women face that are often forgotten, as well as a lot of the accomplishments that Black women have made, because majority of the things that we use in society was created by Black women, but nobody knows that because our history is so whitewashed and not taught correctly in schools. So I decided that that was my way of having an audience to educate them, since I couldn't educate them in person. So yes, as the pandemic went on, I also went online with my activism.
Yeah, much like Phebean was saying, it's a lot of activism shifted towards social media and towards virtual events, and I really am thankful. While Zoom was challenging at first for people to figure out, I think that it really has brought in a lot of positives in building in community and also informing, individuals who are stakeholders. Black Boston, our political advocacy team, one of our members, Rebecca, she led. And engaged a panel discussion with the candidates for the mayor with co-sponsored them with politicking. And that was the first mayoral forum for Boston in this election year. So that was something big that we had. And I think had we had not had the technological tools, to connect with these individuals at the helm of the movement, and individuals who are going to be working with the event, and especially the mayoral candidates themselves, it would have been a lot been harder to go out and to actually find them and to actually go to individuals' offices. And in terms of social media, we, Black Boston, we just had a Boost Black Girls campaign in the following month, trying to show, specifically young Black girls love and things that they're all missing in the society that shows them, um, face of racism and sexism, that they're not meant to be here, but we want to show them that they are, and that they are beautiful, and that they are worthy of a life, and things that and experiences that are worthy of sharing. Because if you feel some type of way, that you can't, no one can ever take that away from you. And so it's a lot. I think the virtual world that we are now entering in, it's something that it's a new frontier, yes, but I think that it brings a lot of positives with it as well, and I am thankful for that.
Oh, Rodney and Phebean, you're both, sort of moving into, Phebean into college. Rodney, you're graduating. How do you see your activism continuing, Phebean on campus, and Rodney sort of now, out in the world?
Yeah, I could take this one off. For me, what I really have started to do is started to have conversations with people in my life about race, um, about topics, about injustices, and also injustices that don't have to directly impact me. Yesterday, I was having a conversation with my friend who identifies as Jewish about um, the occupation of Palestine right now, currently in the region, and we just had a simple discussion, about the history, and kind of where attitudes are now, how we each both feel about the situation, And I think that's one way in which I really think is important, not just for activists, just but for everybody to do. We should really be educating and informing ourselves of the injustices in our societies, experiences that people are going through, whether they look like us or not. Because at the end of the day, we're all people, and we all have to wake up and live in this world. So I think it's important to have these conversations, but you also have to educate yourself and be willing to listen to the other side in order to build something that is comprehensive, and also that you're learning from the process and not just putting forward what you believe and think is
So, like, first of all, congratulations on graduating college. That's amazing. And like you said, Jackney, I would be going to, college in the fall. And I plan on continuing my activism there. In fact, I already told my advisor, like, I am going to be planning events, and I am going to be planning rallies. So I already told them ahead of time. My school knows that I am an activist, and I really think that they like that about me. So I am definitely going to continue educating people, calling out injustices, planning more rallies to educate, a bigger demographic of people, and also learning from others, because as an activist, I'm not perfect, nowhere close to being perfect. So there's a lot that I could also learn. So I would say once I get into college, I would listen and learn from others, at the same time calling out any injustice I see, and planning, rallies and protests and anything that I feel like needs to. And if I don't plan a rally or protest, then I'll plan an event to educate people, because I feel like we can all learn from each other, and conversations are very healthy to move things forward.
What changes do you hope to see now and in the future?
and also congratulations to you. College is a big venture, and I wish you the best of luck. I, I, the change that I really hope to see in the future is, we had this pandemic. We've seen that the positivity rate for COVID was much higher, black and brown communities compared to communities of white communities.
Rodney, can you move a little closer to the mic? I think we're losing you a little bit.
Can you hear me now? Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, yeah. So I was saying, in the past year, we've seen the pandemic, and we've seen how it has really preyed on injustices that already exist in our communities. So I think that one thing that I really change what I really hope to change is that we can recognize as a society that injustices are not right, and that we should be doing everything that we can, using resources, using our connections to close the gap. Um, if people are if people are high poverty levels, asking why, and actually getting to the root of the problem instead of addressing the back end of the problem, which is the consequences, and kind of what I feel the criminal justice system is now focusing on, instead of the problem, which is systematic racism. And the reason why many black and brown individuals are incarcerated. And another reason with this, and what I look for the future, is honestly the prospect of reparation, and the fact that there have been things done, and that doesn't just mean giving money back to the community in check, but that means investing in infrastructure, investing in health and mental health services to make sure that communities are being need and met with the services that they need and want, instead of policing that really victimizes and hurts our communities and just creates that cycle of violence. So what I really hope for is a shift in the attitudes of how we look at issues, and also how we address them, and also taking resources to make sure that we're not victimizing our communities, but instead supporting them, constructing communities, and allowing us to have gatherings and conversations for us to build stronger interpersonal connections. I think that's something that we all have generally.
Wow, so there's a lot I want to see change in our society. Our institutions are systemically racist, sexist, homophobic, transphobic, and all of these things, like, xenophobic, and I don't like that. And I want marginalized communities to not have to face oppression anymore in America. I want, as a Black woman, to not be scared that my pains or the pains of my fellow sisters are going to be ignored by the doctors because they have this belief that Black women don't feel pain, or we can feel more pain, or we can take more pain. Like, I do not want medical bias at all. I want us to take, I want to remove systemic racism in our school system. The fact that a lot of schools are heavily underfunded, that's not okay. I want to take that out too. I want to take any, honestly, I could literally sit here and go on everything I want to see our society change to be less discriminatory. So I'll just keep the long story short and say, I want to see justice for all marginalized communities. I want to see equity, because we can't get to equality if we don't start with equity first. So I would like to see equity, justice for all marginalized communities, and just taking down the systems of oppression that oppresses marginalized communities. That's what I would hope to see.
Mm. And so I wonder, for the both of you, what advice you have for other young people, for community members, who are tuning in, and who might watch the recorded version of this, and what advice you would have in terms of those who might want to get involved, but don't know where to start. And I know the both of you had some very recent, jumped right into it. So I'd love for you to talk a little bit about what ignited that, and then what your advice is for those who don't know where to start.
I would say just start with talking with people. I honestly, that's how I became a part of Black Boston 2020. On social media, I took a note of the founders of the organization, and who was behind the movement, and I just was like, hey, let me just see, what their organization is about, what they believe in, and some of the things that they're doing. And I had this conversation, and I came out of the conversation feeling like, oh, this is something I want to be a part of. This is something that if I have an opportunity and a chance to, that I would apply, and hopefully be able to work with this organization. And lo and behold, 2 months later, Black Boston 2020 was having applications. So for the political advocacy team. So I think that for young people, you really have to just start to look at the world around you. And if you're seeing, a nonprofit that you like, let's say Daily Table, for example, which provides subsidized food in communities of Boston, for low-income families. If that's something that where you feel like you could fit into, research Daily Table. Look at who may be on the board. Look at who's actually working at the organization, and just reach out and just ask questions, and just be open to learning. You don't have to know everything. If you'll find it in life that a lot of people want to teach you more, rather than having you communicate to them about what you know. So I think that just go out and have conversations, just get to know people in your community. It really starts with that. Everything in our society is constructed by an individual, and someone, is at the helm, of whatever is going on, whether that be a nonprofit, a business, or anything. So I think that it just starts with identifying who's in the control, and kind of figuring out whether you fit in, or if you don't, hopefully they have a connection that you may be able to talk to, and then you could be pointing that direction.
Rodney, I thank you for that point you made about just talking to people, because there's a lot that they can share. That's such an important, just talk, like asking questions and listening. So I appreciate you making that point as a starting point for activism. Phebean, go ahead.
Yes, so I would say start where you are. There's no only one right way to be an activist. There are multiple ways to be an activist. Start where you are and find your niche. I think my answer is going to be very similar to our representative Brandy's answer, because there's so many different ways to be involved in activism. You could be someone who loves to, protest or hold up a sign. You might be someone who, spreads awareness through social media. You might be someone who gives therapy to activists, provides them food or water in protest, or you may be a medical professional who, helps them or explains to them how to treat, like, a tear gas wound or something like that. There are many, many different ways to be an activist, and you just have to find where you feel like you would make the most change and follow your heart that way, because, there are multiple ways to fight for justice and there are multiple ways to be an activist. I would say ask a lot of questions. Don't be afraid to, listen. And, when you're wrong, admit that you're wrong, apologize, and keep fighting for justice, because again, no, none of us are perfect. We live and we learn every day. So I would say don't be afraid to, correct yourself and say, I was wrong and I shouldn't have said or done that. So I apologize. Ask a lot of questions and, just follow your heart and find your niche, because there's so many ways to be an activist, so many ways. And, the last thing I would say is make sure you self-care, because sometimes it can be exhausting being an activist with all these injustices, especially being an activist of color. So definitely take time to self-care, and don't feel guilty about it, because I used to feel guilty about it and I still sometimes a little bit do. So I would say try your best not to feel guilty about it. So self-care.
And I know that both of you are, again, transitioning into, the next chapter in your lives, and but I wonder, how can people get involved in your work or with your organizations?
I would definitely say follow Black Boston 2020, Instagram, Twitter, all of our social media handles, um, and really stay informed with the campaigns that we're pushing out, especially uh, the Boost Black Girls campaign. We had a training session, the political advocacy team, with this organization called My Life, My Choice, which advocates for individuals who are in the human trafficking world, and who have had experiences with that. And my point of that is really engage with campaigns that you're seeing, and that we're doing, and really kind of identify um, information or resources or research that you could do to better inform yourself about what's going on, because there's some things that we might not know about, and while we can commute information through social media, it's not all the information that you need. So I would definitely say, engage in the work as much as you can on the surface level, but also do your own research and do your own homework to make sure that you're also personalizing it too. So it's not like this organization is doing it and you're just a bystander. You're actually actively engaging with the work as well.
And I'll just ask one more question. Either what about this work keeps you inspired, or who inspires you to keep going with this work?
What inspires me, seeing the injustices happening in the world, and that anger pushes me to keep going and pushes me to not stop until, well, self-care, please, but pushes me to just keep going and keep fighting for justice. I would say, looking at the society we live in right now and how, there's just, it seems like every single day there's another bad news or another injustice happening somewhere in the world is hurtful. So I say seeing all of those things makes me want to fight so that I could help change those systems and make the world a better place for others. And I'm not sure if you wanted me to answer the last question.
Yes. How
So
can you get involved in your work? Yeah.
Oh yeah, I don't have an organization. I mean, I'm a part of different organizations, but I don't, in terms of my activism work that I'm doing, I do not have an organization. Maybe I could form one in the future, but right now I don't have one. I do partner up with different organizations, like, BDL, I've partnered up with you a lot of times. So I do partner up with other organizations. And I would say, so I do have, I did create an empowering Black women account on Instagram where I just spread positive news to specifically Black women. And, I have a Black positivity account also on Instagram where I, just spread positive news. And I created this account in 2020 because of the bad news that we kept seeing every single day. And I figured that the Black community, we're tired. We've been tired. Marginalized communities, we're tired. So I created the Black Positivity account where all I share is positive Black news or, facts that people didn't know about, the Black community. Like, for example, a Black woman was the one who created the hair conditioner or home security system, something like that. So I use it as a way to inform people as well as giving them positive, things. So, yeah.
Well, thank you both for joining us tonight. Thank you, for the work that you're doing and pushing forward, because we definitely need more of that. And continue to do this. Remain passionate. And keep definitely putting your heart out there, and also continue to have those conversations and bring more people sort of into this discussion. Um, Thank you both for joining us tonight. Thank you for your time, your words, and all of your contributions, here and outside of this space. Congratulations to Phebean. Good luck out there. I know we'll be hearing your name, I'm sure, and same with you, Rodney. Thank you for joining us, and congratulations on completing your college career, and wishing you the best of luck with everything that you do moving forward. And I also want to thank State Representative Brandy Fluker Oakley for joining us this evening for our conversation at Fireside Chat. Thank you for sharing with us your work, your passion, and everything that you've done. If you have not had a chance, you can check the chat where the representative has dropped some information there for you about the bills that she has filed, and also ways that you can connect with your elected officials. Rodney has also dropped some information about Black Boston 2020. Follow them on Instagram and Twitter. Phebean, thank you for providing more information about Find Black Positivity, also included in the chat. And as we are closing out tonight, we'd love to, again, as always, ask you to complete our survey, which I just saw dropped in the chat, to just let us know your feedback about this conversation and our series. And really, thank you all for joining us today for this discussion. And thank you to everyone who's joined us over this last year for our Race, Equity, and Policy Series community conversations. We've definitely learned a lot, and learned about a lot of resources and work that's happening in our community around this topic. But please keep in touch with us. You can sign up for the Boston Debate League's email list to stay up to date on what's happening. You can also visit our Race, Equity, and Policy Series page at bostondebate.org/rep series, where you can watch this forum and all the forums that we've held this year. I think my colleagues have dropped our survey and the link to sign up for email in the chat. So you can definitely sign up for that. We want to keep in touch with you. But also, we are on social media as well. So follow us on Instagram, Twitter, and LinkedIn to keep up to date on everything that the Boston Debate League is doing. And we hope that you will join us next year for events that we'll be holding. And just thank you, everyone. This has been a really great series. And thank you, everyone. And lastly, I see we've also had, before I close out, Representative Brandy Fluker Oakley has also dropped her information, Rep Fluker Oakley, on Twitter. You can follow her on Twitter. And at Boston Debate is the Boston Debate League on Twitter. So please follow us on social media. Thank you all for a wonderful series. Check back on our website to see the recording for this series and the conversations throughout the year. Thank you, everyone.